Today I've got I'm really excited about this presentation because play is just so fundamental to so much of what we do as parents, and it's so good for children. And I've got the lovely Chiara Rossetti with us today, who is a parenting educator and has a real interest in play. So she's going to share some of her immense wisdom. So over to you, Chiara.
Thank you, Tracy. Hello, everyone. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this beautiful land and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to thank you, Tracy, for having me on. I'm really looking forward to doing this presentation and happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. You can all contact me via email. I'm happy to also share my mobile number if anyone wants to inquire about any part of what I'm about to speak about. So my name is Chiara Rossetti. I'm an aware parenting instructor and I've been practicing aware parenting for about 15 years. This talk will mainly be based around Aletha Salter's thesis and book about attachment play, although, you know, play is a very wide topic as far as parenting goes, and in fact, life in general. I'm currently living in Western Australia. We're a homeschooling family. I've got an 18-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son who are wonderfully walking a dog that would have barked this entire time. So we've got hopefully some peace and quiet. So I'm going to talk today about play and fun and how valuable it can be in any parent's toolkit. For the purpose of this talk, as I said, I will approach play from Aletha Salter's attachment play concepts, mainly because she has broken types of play down into a really useful format. And it's a really good way, especially for people that are new to the idea of play, to demonstrate the theory of why and how to play. And although it sort of can feel a little bit like it can, I don't want to bog you down in theory, but I found it to be so useful to break play down into this format that Aletha has done. I would also like to acknowledge my first mentor, Marion Rose, who introduced me to aware parenting 15 years ago and changed my life. We have not looked back since the day I had my first consultation with her. And it was about sleep when my youngest was 4 months old. Before I move on, I would also like to nod and bow deeply to Patty Whitfler of Hand in Hand Parenting and Larry Cohen, author of an amazing book called Playful Parenting. If you haven't read it, highly recommend that book as well. Hand in Hand Parenting site is fabulous and there are plenty of free resources to get you started. All of these people are helping to change the way people raise their children in a much more respectful way. And you know, peaceful parenting, I'm not sure what you could call it, but it's a wonderful middle path that I have, you know, I'm so grateful that I discovered all those years ago. So starting off, I know play can be difficult for a lot of parents. You know, yes, babies are easy to sort of, you know, goo over and coo over. I particularly love Aletha Salter's approach because it also helps with non-punitive discipline, which is another area of parenting that I'm passionate about. I have raised 2 teenagers, as I said, without ever being, ever having to bribe them or punish them. And so I'm eternally grateful that I've learned that this was a possibility. Not only is it possible, it's a really respectful way to develop trust and connect with your children as they grow. Why is play magic, you might be thinking? Why play in the first place? Well, essentially, the formula is play leads to deeper connection, which leads to feeling great for all involved, which then leads to feeling better, which leads to behaving better, which leads to being better well-being for all involved. So really it's a, you know, it's a win-win situation. Play nourishes children's developing brains and it helps them make sense of this big, sometimes daunting world. It helps them to have healthy nervous systems, even when life throws challenges their way, which it does and it will. By play, I also want to mention that I include rituals, like I love you rituals, and certain customs that, you know, I'll talk about later on. I am going to begin by talking about Aletha Salter's 9 types of attachment parenting. And I'd love to give brief examples of games. Some of them are mine, some of them are hers. And look, I've been in this field for so long that I also want to apologize to anyone if I've accidentally borrowed games and claimed them as my own. But I think play and games are really, they're a free resource. I love people to take my ideas. I am more than happy to just, think of as many games as people need to play for certain parts of, the children's lives, and just use them as your own, develop, build on them, and have lots of fun. That's essentially what we're here for. So before I begin, I do want to remind you that play, especially from an aware parenting point of view, often can lead to big feelings coming to the surface for young children especially, which can result in crying, tantrums, or shaking. Now, I know this might sound daunting to people that are possibly new to this type of connection, but I assure you that play helps children find the balance that they need between overwhelm and upset, and that beautiful feeling of emotional safety that Marion Rose calls the sweet spot, which allows children to be able to express whatever needs to come out, whenever it needs to come out. So after connecting through play, your kid can sometimes suddenly appear grumpy or upset. They may change mood quite dramatically. And this is where we actually then, in this parenting modality, allow them to rage, allow the tears to come to the surface, but always remain close. Never leave them. We try not to shame them. I know a lot of our stuff comes up, but just sitting there and allowing them, their feelings to bubble to the surface, is part of why this play is called attachment play. We sit there until their feelings subside naturally. And I know this isn't always possible, and I know it's not always easy, but with practice, you'll be able to help your children release their louder, more uncomfortable feelings in, for example, a safe setting of your house. So you don't have to, be constantly worried that they're going to suddenly have a big meltdown in the middle of a shopping centre. So it's another really super useful part of this modality. I'd also like to let everyone know that every parent, every carer, every grandparent is 100% capable of play. I know that some of us have slightly, well, us, not us, I have the opposite, but lots of people have sort of a more serious character. So again, a reminder, it doesn't have to be nonsense play. It doesn't have to be silly. It's all about connection, connection, connection. So if we can keep that in our mind as I speak. And also want to remind you that we can start in tiny little baby steps. This doesn't have to be something that you need to launch into, unless of course you're called to launch into it. But starting slowly with play is often also advised if you're not usually quite playful, because children also need to adapt to the fact that someone who normally doesn't play is starting to play with them. So as I said before, play can be as simple as just sitting on the floor and watching how your child responds to you. It can be playing with bath water. It can be, making cups of sand tea at the beach. You can crush flower petals into potions. It's just about sitting and connecting with true presence with your child. And more often than not, if you allow that space, you'll actually see that your child will then lead the play, and you actually don't have to do anything or think of any complicated games. It can also be rambunctious. Play can be loud. It can involve all sorts of props and toys and be generally quite outrageous. So there's a whole sort of spectrum of, of play and fun. What we're looking for is quality, not really quantity. We are looking for consistency, because that really helps children's nervous systems. Quality of connection and presence are absolutely key, and sometimes less is more. So as you start introducing play into your world, you'll get to fine-tune yourself to your kids' reactions, and you'll be able to observe their body language and gauge which level of play they're ready for at each moment in their lives. Sometimes as parents we do get it wrong, and it can come across as a bit sort of like mocking or teasing. Also fine. Your child will let you know if you've gone too far. I know often I've gone over the top and gotten carried away. My children let me know, a really good time to stop, pause, rewind, and redo when the time's ready. It's also okay to not be, to continue that if you want to just, have some time out after whatever that rambunctiousness has brought up. I also want to remind parents that it is never, ever too late to start playing. I still play with my teenagers and we still laugh daily. And I'm not just saying that, we really do, especially my daughter. My son is a little bit more, he's a little bit quieter as far as giggles go. My teenage daughter and I, we do that ugly belly laughing, holding onto your ribs sort of laughter. We try for it daily. Sometimes it just comes naturally. Sometimes, I lead the way. Some parents I have worked with seem to stop playing when their children hit high school years or sort of the early teen years. Somehow, some way along the way, we've suddenly thought that, children now need to have a much more serious life. But I would actually argue that the early teen years are one of the best times to start ramping up connection through silliness and play. You can introduce sexual innuendo. Toilet humor is fabulous for any age, especially for teenagers and young kids, or even adults like me who still run with those really basic play ideas. I do encourage parents to start playing throughout the day, especially during those boring daily routines like bedtime, dinner time, toothbrushing, those things that, often are the markers in our lives that children will demonstrate to us if they have anything that needs to come up to the surface. So play is fabulous for things like problems at bedtime and issues around food. If this all sounds too daunting, then connecting through play in tiny mini opportunities throughout the day is the advice I would give. Kids really, really don't require that much from us. Presence and consistency is really all we need to begin this. So I'm going to go into a bit of theory about attachment play, and I will give a few examples, and there are thousands more games that you can play under each of these categories. Number one is these are in no particular order, by the way. So number one is what Elisa Salter calls non-directive child-centered play. So you essentially let your child lead, no suggestions, no micromanaging, no sneaking in life lessons, no specific expectations of the outcome. Children are geniuses at play. I truly believe that it is their language. This may be the easiest play to begin with if you're brand new to the concept of play and lightness. And again, as I said before, this can mean something as easy as just sitting or lying on the floor and watching to see what your child does. Kids will often demonstrate exactly what play they need to either help them make sense of things which they have struggled with, or any stresses that have come up for them during their lives. So, for example, if you sit down and start playing with your child, just sit there on the floor and observe, they might do something like randomly start biting one of their toys, right? So from this perspective, it could mean that they're actually trying to make sense of something that they have maybe seen. Like, for example, they might have seen a dog bite another dog at the beach, or they might have seen a child bite another child. So the other thing they often do is make silly sounds or do random things that make absolutely no sense to you. So where I'm going with this is you don't really need to go on a witch hunt about why children are doing certain things, but it can be useful sometimes, because then you can actually tailor make the play to the need that the child is trying to express. Staying curious is all you really need to do in these scenarios. So always a good opportunity to copy your child and see if you can get giggles flowing. So if your child, when you're sitting on the floor, starts biting a teddy bear, do the same, mirror their actions, see how they react, observe. You can ham it up if you think your child is ready for more play, or you can just sit back and pause and see what comes of it. So This type of play then leads nicely onto the second type of play, which Aletha calls contingency play. So this is where an adult has a repeated, and let me just note here, a non-startling reaction. We don't want to add any more stress. So an adult has a repeated reaction to something that the child has done. So it's basically cause and reaction. Predictability for children is fabulous for the developing sense of security and self, and can help so much with feelings of powerlessness that they may have felt during their lives. So let me give you some examples of games. You'll all have played these at one stage or other if you've got toddlers. Games like they drop the teddy bear on the floor out of the high chair. Then this is where you pick it up, kiss it, hand it back to them. Repeat, repeat for as long as you can. If the child starts giggling, keep going. And again, you can, start dropping other things on the floor if you get bored, but you might see that the child doesn't get bored of really simple games when they're very young. So copying the movements or sound is also another simple yet profound thing you could do. So literally mirroring anything they do. You can mirror their movements with your body. Oh yeah, sounds are another good one here. So if your child does something, every time they do a certain thing, you can go blow raspberries, make a farty sound, and then watch and see what your child does. So really great for the younger years. Number 3 is nonsense play. So nonsense play is absolutely my favorite. I seem to excel at this type of play, and I'm never quite sure if it's a brag or if I should be concerned. I was really lucky. My dad is still alive. He's 90, but my dad used to play with us a lot as children. We didn't see much of him because he would work a lot, but every time he came home, he would play with us. And it was often he's quite eccentric, so it was quite ridiculous play. And I think that just has rubbed off on me. And I'm so grateful for his wackiness, because it especially has helped, in the teen years, because it's great to have teenagers, fake mock tease you. And I just find nonsense play to be brilliant, and it comes really easily to me. Nonsense play can involve toilet humor. It can involve something like just getting into the wrong side of the car when you're driving off somewhere, pretending you've lost the steering wheel. You can pretend you've completely forgotten how to brush your teeth and instead start brushing your ear or your belly button. Singing silly songs that children know the words to, but you change the words, or you can put different sounds in for certain words. Always a winner for young kids. Nonsense play is really fabulous for everyday chores like getting dressed. You can pretend, we used to often when the kids were little, pretend that I was a fancy French boutique owner, and accents are fabulous. You can do them, or at least try to do them, really ham it up. And the children, when we were getting dressed, would have to bring me their clothes, and I would bring them the clothes, sorry, and we would do things like put their trousers on their heads, or tie shirts around the middle, or we even used pillow slips and put them on as hats. Another favorite game, a nonsense game that Mary and Rose actually suggested, we used to play this for literally hours, was throwing their pajamas at them at bedtime while they ran around the dining room table. And the rule was really simple. So you ball up the clothes, chuck it at them. If the pajama bottoms hit any body part, they had to put them on. And because I had a daughter and a son, it got quite raucous, because I'd even involve my pajamas. And if my pajamas hit, say my young son, he'd have to put the oversized pajamas on as well. And this just helped to really get those last minute emotions out at bedtime. Often just led to raucous laughter. And we actually built on this game some nights, and I'd end up, balling up toilet paper and throwing at them, or their toothbrushes, gently at them. And anytime, they'd have to go and do their nighttime wee if the toilet paper hit them, or they'd have to go and brush their teeth. Very simple, but the kids loved it, and they would ask for that game every night. And literally, I think we played it for about 3 years, not every night, but it really helped with easing any struggles at bedtime. And they would wake up feeling much more connected the next day, which was a really beautiful observation. I find playing at bedtime is a really great way to connect, and children will show you how much pent-up stress they've accumulated that needs to be released. So often children have endless requirements for, 100 glasses of water at night, and you've got, as a parent pulling your hair out going, why are they not sleeping? And this is just a call for connection for your children. So it's a reminder. Bedtime is a reminder for children that there's impending disconnection from their loved ones. So often asking for glasses of water 100 times is their way of trying to reach out for connection at times when their defenses might be a little bit lower. So play is magical. I know it can sound counterintuitive at bedtime, but I guarantee that night play will solve so many bedtime issues, and you'll just generally notice after a few weeks your child will be just more centered and more content. Sometimes it might take longer. Again, I'd like to remind you, this is not about fixing and trying to get your child to do anything. This is about connecting so that your child can then actually live their lives from their much more, really hard to find words, from their more true center. That's the words I think I'll use for now.
Chiara, can I just comment on that? I just really
Sure.
like what you've shared there, because I think as parents, particularly, if they've been at daycare or they've just picked them up from school and they're getting home and there's this pressure to get things done and pressure to get them into bed and have some time for yourself. And we have this idea that we should be trying to settle the children down, but I think your point about the fact that they're often quite wired and their nervous system has had to take on so much during the day, having games that can really release that tension and unwind it. Yeah.
And Tracy, what I'd also like to insert here is, it's also okay after you've sort of, gotten used to playing as a family. It's also okay. I remember there were times when I actually said to the kids, you know what? I have no play in me tonight. You actually need to just go to sleep. And, again, doesn't always work how you want it to work. But I did notice the more we connected at bedtime and throughout the day, those nights where I literally had zero left to give, they would get it, because they knew that we had this beautiful background of constant connection, and they respect that. So it's, I guess that's a loving limit, using, again, Marion Rose's term. It's also, we don't have to always play and always, pander to children's needs. This is about looking respectfully at everyone's needs. Yeah. But play is such a creative way to deal with issues that usually bring up stuff for parents, like, you're just going, oh my God, I've had the longest, most stressful day. I just need them to go to sleep. And of course, as children so magically do, they pick up on that and then they ask for the million, glasses of water, or they start acting out. And we don't use the word naughty. It's not a naughty is quite a derogatory term, but they're louder and their sort of more uncomfortable feelings come up, and then of course the parent gets emotionally triggered, and you end up just disconnecting before bedtime, and it often ends up with everyone crying. So as far as play goes, to me it's a fabulous alternative. It's a really wonderful option. And if you can start a little bit early, I do suggest later on in the talk, start a little bit early in the night, so you're prepared for any, rambunctious, whatever needs to come out. Then just having that mindset of, okay, I'm going to go to sleep to bed half an hour early. We're going to play for half an hour. It might wind them up a little bit, but I'm ready. To me, that reset is actually a lifesaver at times. And I just invite parents to experiment, see how it goes. I've never met a family that it hasn't worked for yet. There might be some families that this just doesn't work for, but I think that would be, there'd be sort of deeper issues at play there that would need different approaches. So yeah, absolutely. So my next part was that if you are feeling emotionally or physically, if your resources are so low at bedtime, then you can also start slowly. It doesn't have to be big games. It can be, my daughter, for example, when she was very young, used to like me just pretending to put makeup on her face. And it was just such a gentle thing to do, and I could see her it would help her relax. And my boy used to have certain things that he'd like. He'd like me to kiss his cheeks very gently. So it doesn't have to be big, giant games. Again, it's just all about connection. So moving on, separation games. Really fabulous for kids whose parents are going through separation or divorce, or who have already separated. Amazing type of play for kids who have to spend time away from their loved ones, or children who are new to navigating daycare or school. Also very... Sorry?
Could you give some examples of separation games? Because I think they're another big challenge, particularly going to daycare.
Absolutely. I have millions of them because I was separating when my children were little. So this is another part of, I have so many great ideas. And there's another lady called Shelley Clark that's an aware parenting instructor who also has amazing games for separation. So I'll try and find where she lists them. I know she did a live the other day, and I'll try and remember some of those games. So with separation, the theory behind it is you act out a short separation and then you appear. So for tiny babies, things like peekaboo, classic game. Peekaboo, you disappear, you come back. Tiny infants, even really tiny infants, will always respond somehow. Their eyes will open or their bodies will move. You'll see there's some kind of reaction when they start to smile. Often when they're slightly older infants, they giggle at a game as simple as peekaboo. Hide and seek is another classic that is so of all ages fabulous. You can do it in your house. It doesn't have to be outdoors. So a few examples that we played as kids were my children, and this is, again, they would ask for this. I would again at bedtime would wrap them up in blankets, and they would say, "Mom, the postman's come," and I'd come in and act all surprised that there was this incredible big wiggly parcel, and I'm so excited that whatever it is, and I'd really slowly start to open the sheets up, and they'd poke their fingers out, or I'd touch the top of their heads and go, "Oh, what is this? What has the postman brought?" And they're wrapped up together, giggling, trying not to make a sound. And then I'd open it and be so surprised, and I'd either be, I could be so loving and go, "Oh my goodness, it's my kids, I'm so glad you're back, what a great parcel." Or I could be quite outrageous and go, "Oh my God, hang on, this is not what I ordered a puppy, what is this?" And it would always get them laughing. And again, they would ask for this over and over and over when they were young. So other games I used to play is when they came home from their dad's house, is I would count their body parts. I'd stop them at the door, and what's beautiful is touching their ears and go, "Yes, hang on, earlobes present, tick. Oh, hang on, there's some cheekiness that wasn't there." I'd sort of act in mock horror that the wrong child had been delivered, because I'd say, for example, that the child I sent away had 3 belly buttons. Why is there only 1 now? And I'd go out into the garden and pretend to look for them. And sometimes the kids would sort of be a little bit like, "Okay, don't really want to play this," and I would totally respect that and move on. Other times you can see that they'd sort of lean forward and want more of this kind of game. I also used to like, when they came to the door, I would actually let them step in the door, and I would go out and pretend I was the returning child and come in and say, "Oh, I feel like being really outrageous today, let's blow bubbles all over the house." And I'd pretend I had this alter ego called Rory, who was this wild little American child who was always up to mischief, and that was always got lots of laughter and giggles. The other one that I used to do is sometimes I'd pretend the wrong child was delivered home, and I'd go and look in the post box and pretend to be in a panic, and I'd be like, "No, Mum, I'm here, it's me." And again, they would ask for these games all the time. And I know as parents it can get a little bit boring, but repetition really is so magical, especially for young children, because it just increases their sense of emotional safety. And Sometimes parents can feel really bored during these games. Also, okay, if you are too bored and don't want to fake it, move on. But often the kids, when they ask, it's really hard to say no because they're so sweet. And once you realize the power of this, then maybe it'll encourage you to realize that actually the boring games they're asking you to do are deeply healing for them. So the other, I don't know what number we're up to, but power reversal games, again, so fabulous. And what I love about this, Tracy, is you don't need a PhD. This isn't play therapy. This isn't deep psychology. This isn't like, crazy theory that most people can't get their heads around. This is really so beautifully described. This is for everyone. This is easy for all ages. Even grandparents can do this. Elderly grandparents, carers. This is something that I love, that it's not rocket science. I especially love that. And the fact that play can be so profoundly healing will constantly amaze me, like constantly. And at the end, I might tell you a little story about when the kids were little and went through some sort of quite sad parts of their lives, and how I watched them create the games and the play that they needed in order to heal from whatever they needed to heal from. So power reversal games are, look, all kids feel powerlessness at some stage in their lives, not only emotionally, but also because of their physical size. They're little, and the world is, it's big and it's loud. And even if you live in the forest and everything is not loud and overstimulating, children still need to make sense of the bigger world around them. So, but they also grow up in an adult-centered world, and it's not, yes, there is types of parenting that allow kids to just do whatever they want whenever they want. But again, it's often at the expense of the parents' needs not being met. So play and creative attachment play are really a beautiful middle ground that aim, not always perfectly, but aim to at least meet most needs of most of the people involved in the relationship most of the time. So anytime you can give the children free rein, fabulous. So feelings of powerlessness can feel very depleting, which often means that it leads to them behaving. I would like to I sort of think of when they're feeling powerlessness, behavior sort of slips out sideways. It's a bit like a pressure cooker, it's not allowed to be released at a steady flow. It comes out sideways, and children are tiny, but they've got a big might. And when they try to reclaim lost control, it can be really quite daunting for adults to deal with. So the answer here is play and connection. So any game where you can be physically lower than them, sillier than them, or less powerful, or act less intelligently, always brilliant. Pillow fights, gentle pillow fights. We used to play a game where when they were swinging, when they were very young, they were swinging at the playground, and I'd stick my bum out, and they would tap me on the bum, and I'd be like, ah, you hit me on the bum, and it just made them laugh so much. Or I would roll on the ground, and so it just gives them a sense that anything that they do has a big effect. And you'll see they love it. They all love it. All children just adore this type of play. Games where they return to being a younger version of themselves are also really useful, and kids will often irritate parents by regressing into things like baby talk, or wanting to eat baby food. Or any time a child regresses, it can sometimes trigger a parent. But instead of being irked by children doing baby voices, really great opportunity to ham it up, pick them up, act like they are actually a baby, smell their nappy, pretend they're a little puppy, pretend that their nappy's so stinky and you're so horrified you just can't possibly change the stinky nappy. So you're sort of going along with their need to regress. And we used to play this fabulous game called I Want Chocolate, Not Poo. And I would hold my children over the bed, often at bedtime, and I would sort of go, oh, look, I've got this lovely newborn baby. She's so cute. She's so lovely. And then they would go, I'm not a baby. I'm a stinky fish, or I'm rotten garbage. And I would sort of look down in horror, and I'd throw them gently onto the bed. Again, hours of fun. And they would ask for this game over and over. In fact, until they got too heavy for me to carry. The other one I used to like, when they regressed or wanted to be babies, is I would hold them but turn them upside down. So I'd be like, oh my goodness, your bottom is, I'd pretend their bottoms were their heads and vice versa. And again, the kids loved it. Would play for hours. These types of games about powerlessness are really fabulous at bedtime. And again, I know it sounds utterly bonkers to play with children in this manner at bedtime, but I assure you that it really does help children feel safe enough to shed any accumulated feelings, which then lead to better sleep. We keep coming back to the sleep issue. So power reversal games are really great at times when your child also has had to leap into more independence in their life, or when they have had lengthier separations, or when a significant event has happened. Power reversal games are, well, basically always a winner. So we're nearly done with the theory. Again, one of my favorites, body contact games. Aletha has a really simple game that she suggested, where I think it was her niece or nephew would just run towards her and she would pick them up in her arms. So basic, so simple, so connecting, and you get to touch the child, make the child feel safe. If the child's okay to be picked up, fine. You can swirl them around and you can just, see what the child wants to do at those moments. So again, that is not rocket science, very, very simple. There's a really beautiful book, and I didn't actually reference it because I read it years ago before I was aware of all this stuff. And I think the author was Becky something, and it was called I Love You Rituals. And she had a really beautiful, really simple body contact game that I've used with young children quite a lot. And my kids loved it, where you get their hands and pretend that their hands are a beehive, and you have to stop the bees escaping. And there's something so nourishing about holding little hands in the beehive sort of shape. And they're sort of intrigued, and you can see their imagination. You can see that children really want to stop the bees escaping. And, it's just such a simple thing to hold children's hands, if they're okay with it, if you know them well enough. I do want to note here, Tracy, not sure how many people have explored this, but from this type of attachment play, we really discourage tickling. So when I say body contact, it has to be really, I know this is, this sounds a bit patronizing, but it has to be really respectful of the child's bodily needs. Tickling can often be a little bit overwhelming for the senses. Ticklers can, it's the fast moving sort of surprise on their bodies, and often things that seem as innocent as pulling their shirt up and rasping their bellies can actually be quite startling for a lot of children, especially when they're young. So we discourage tickling because we just don't want the child to feel overwhelmed or attacked. I know it's all very well intentioned, but I remember hating it as a child. There's something about the randomness of how I was being tickled that I found very unsettling. The other thing that I noticed that my kids used to really hate, my boy, especially when he was young, he was just so cute, and people just wanted to sort of interact with him physically. So it was often like male friends of mine would come up behind him and pick him up and throw him in the air, and it's just too startling for a child. And then he'd start screaming, and my male friend would be standing there going, oh, what have I done? What have I done? And, so I was in that uncomfortable position of saying, you startled him, you came up from behind. So body contact games are great ways to, help children that have gone through any issues with, being touched in ways that they didn't want to be touched. At times they didn't want to be touched, but it's really fabulous for teaching your children about their body and about their physical boundaries, letting your child state all of the rules and noting that they can change from day to day is just such a beautiful way to teach them really important lessons. So examples of body contact play, again, good old-fashioned ones. Little children, bounce them on the knees. Airplane games, you know, that one where you lie on the ground and your feet are up and the child is sort of like that. Hours and hours of fun. We used to actually, especially at toothbrushing time, pretend that when I was lying in that position, pretend I was a mechanic and that was the hoist. And my son in particular would love this game, and he would, you know, want to be hoisted up. You have to have quite strong legs if your children are heavier, but you hoist them up and down, and then they sort of press your they press your nose, and you know, that alters the level of where they are at, and then you can actually even get a toothbrush in or get them to brush it, and you know, it turns into this big great game of, you know, the funny mechanic who's fixing this child. Might be a nice time to talk about customs and ritual as a part of play as well. This is another part that doesn't often get mentioned in any of the circles I'm in, but my daughter, for example, when she was little, we had a sort of a hammock swing chair in the garden, and she could lay back in it, and I would get a bucket of water and just really slowly and beautifully wash her hair. And there's something so simple about doing something for the sake of it, not because it, you know, her hair had to be washed. She would ask for it, especially at times when she really needed to connect with me. And we live in a sunny country, so, you know, most of the time, most of the year, we could do that. Even just brushing hair is a really loving, beautiful, I would call it a ritual rather than a play, but it's a really lovely way to connect with your children at times. Again, when the brushing is done for the sake of brushing, not because you have to brush knots out or get them out the door or rush them anywhere, you're just being with your child and connecting with them with something as simple as hair brushing. The other one my children used to love as kids, warm foot baths. We don't actually have a bath, so we had this beautiful ritual and a custom of they still have them, these buckets, we'd fill them with water, Epsom salt, sometimes slices of lemon. And, you know, it all sounds very indulged, but it was really lovely, and especially lovely in the winter. And they would sit with foot baths. We would colour in as a family. Simple, beautiful, beautiful idea for bedtime. It would really calm them down. Again, really great for parents who aren't quite ready for rambunctious play. There are so many things you can do like that with children. Right, cooperation games. Really fabulous for strengthening connection and taking away any icky feelings that they may have had of losing at something, not being quite as capable of that something that they would have liked to have been. The world is, you know, generally quite competitive, even if you try and avoid it. So these cooperative games really enforce that sense of, it gives them that extra sort of that intrinsic sense of self-esteem, which is just so beautiful to teach a child this way through play. We're so wired for connection. So games, you can actually now get many games, the board games that are cooperative, which I think are just so fascinating. There's a really simple one that our friend has called Mind, and you're sitting around, it's just cards numbered 1 to 100, and without speaking too much, you have to connect and try and count the numbers up with the cards that you've got, and you either all lose or you all win. And it's just such a different way of playing board games. I'm not a board game person, so I can't suggest any more, but I'm sure if you did a quick search online, you could find quite a lot of these cooperation games. Also things like, I remember as a child doing games where we'd sit in circles and you'd have to throw balls and keep the ball going for as long as possible. So again, you know, it depends on the child, because some kids don't want to be the person that drops the ball, but anytime you can, especially in a group, connect that way, it's to me, we need more of it. So that's the 9 types of play. I hope I haven't lost you all in all the theory. I do want to just say that I wanted to add a few notes at the end. Laughter and play, as fabulous and as much as I love it, are not always a great idea. So really the adult has to be feeling quite willing rather than obliged, because we just really don't want this to backfire and cause resentment. And I know, again, don't really feel like I need to say this to parents, but it's well worth noting, because kids pick up on subtle vibes, and you really don't want them building up resentment, because then what you're having is you're creating disconnection rather than connection. So I remember times when I was quite tired and my kids would suggest games, and I'd be like, okay, and I would reluctantly play. Sometimes it would be fine and I'd get into the swing of it. Other times I would have to really connect with myself and go, actually, kids, not feeling it at all, not feeling like laughing, also fine, because you're teaching your children that it's also okay to not have to always agree to everything everyone always wants from them.
Yeah. Can I just in there, Chiara?
Yes.
I really appreciate you saying that, because sometimes in the sessions that I've run with parents, I've had to give them permission to actually not play. Well, not that I have to give them permission to do anything, but the sense that you don't have to play with your children, in that if you're sitting there, you know, pushing a truck or doing something that really isn't floating your boat, your child's going to pick up on that. And I think your point about seeing it as connection. And I often encourage parents to include the children in your play. So if you're hanging out the washing or cooking the dinner or cleaning up the bathroom or whatever, you include them in that without feeling that you have to, on some level, be their entertainer or their their playmate. Because no other period of history have children played and interacted with their kids to what we do now, which is a really good thing, because it is about connection. But we can't be what's not in us. And I think that there's a level of honesty that has to be acknowledged there too. But you've such a beautiful rounded perspective around play that hopefully, with what you've just shared there, will give people a lot of different ideas about how they can be playful without necessarily feeling like they have to give up 2 hours of their time to play trains.
Absolutely. And that's another, you know, the two things I'd like to say to that is, I'm always astounded. Kids really, really don't require that much of us. Like literally 5 minutes of quality time, as long as you can do it consistently once a day. Yes, more is, you know, 5 minutes, maybe a little bit, you know, more is better. But if 5 minutes is all you have, it absolutely, kids pick up on your quantity rather than quality. And I remember, you know, saying that, and I have helped parents with this as well. And I guess this is all part of the journey that we're all learning. This is, again, not about perfection or trying to fix anything. We're not, you know, none of us are broken really. But I was in a horrible family court battle when my son was very little. And so I, you know, quite new to this, also quite tired, having 2 children as a sole parent, going through all this, and there were some other life things going on. But I really pushed myself to the point of sheer exhaustion, because I thought, oh, I have to play with my children, otherwise they just won't love me, and I just need to, you know, and I was so glad that I actually realized that and was able to then deeply look into my needs as they arose, you know, from moment to moment, because I was exhausting myself. And I was also, when you play for less, you know, when your intentions are not pure and not about just connecting with your children. For me, I could see at those times my intentions were trying to win them, trying to impress them, trying to be loved more. It loses the whole sort of essence of this. So just a really good reminder for parents to connect with themselves and then connect with their children. Children will often force you to quickly connect with them before connecting with yourself. It's just part of the parenting dance. But absolutely, I think that's a really good point to bring up. And that also, I also want to say that sometimes play is not great for children that have gone through horrific trauma. Yes, it can help. Yes, lightness can help. But again, there are times in life where you might need external help. I know there are a lot of professionals out there that don't get it and can actually, like, maybe, you know, we've had experience where the professionals are just not on our page with parenting and actually have made suggestions that would be much more harmful for my children. So it's about knowing, you know, exactly what your child needs at each time. And if you can't connect in, then practicing play in this way will then tune you in enough for your children to show you what they need from moment to moment. So I just want, I just sort of have to put that caveat in, that there are sometimes it's great to reach out, and if it's not such dramatic trauma, also a reminder to get help from friends and a supportive community. Aware parenting, and I think hand in hand actually with the people that started the idea of a listening partnership. So there's a few directories worldwide. You can just have a partner that you could be on the other side of the world, a listening partner. You can just call up and have 10 minutes of rah and just raging, where they just listen. They're not, no advice or anything. So just really important to, to support yourself while you're going through this with your children. And Elisa talks about that beautifully in her book, possibly more eloquently than I have done. But
what we hope to do in our sessions in the village is to create places where parents can talk about the challenges and also to feel like what we're going through is normal. We all go through different phases. Yeah. Can you talk about
absolutely
play in relation to food?
Absolutely. So I was a very fussy eater as a child. Protesting at the table was my jam. It was my thing, pardon the pun. And I remember really triggering, especially my Italian dad, where food is just, you just eat and it's on the table, and it was very much his love language. And of course, I picked up on that as a very young child and would go on sort of hunger strikes, and my parents would just not have any idea of what to do about that. And luckily it came from a very nurturing family, so somehow I managed to kind of deal with it and outgrow a lot of that. But I have such memories of having mini tantrums around the table and dangling my hair in the soup and wanting to push my parents' buttons. So for me, of course, having kids brought it all up again. And so the food that I could talk about for 4 hours about games to play around the dinner table, but our most successful one was, I had a fake restaurant when the kids were really little. I was at my dining room table, and I was Rosa, the Italian owner of a disgusting restaurant that served only really gross things like dead flies and maggots. And the kids, we'd write out menus, and they would do things like they'd eat their dinner and then go, "We're not paying, it was too disgusting," and they'd run away, and I'd pretend to chase them with my wooden spoon going, "You've got to come back, or what are you not paying?" And so this game just sort of turned into this massive, I guess it was like theatre really, but it really helped diffuse so much of any emotion that would come up around dinner time, also for me. So another beautiful thing is we're healing alongside our children with this, and you don't have to be overly creative to do this, but introducing play at times like dinner times, which we get so triggered because we're all worried about whether our children are getting enough nutrients, whether they're eating enough, whether what to feed them. It's huge. There's really, have I even met any parents that aren't triggered around food in some manner or other? I'm not sure. So that's a huge game to play, very dramatic. But you can also play smaller games. I mean, again, the classic of the airplane, yes, can work on very tiny infants, but the idea of doing something like tricking children into eating is not where we're going with this. So distracting children rather than connecting them to their bodies is a really, it's quite vital in this modality. I do also know that when my children were young, learning, such a fabulous tool from aware parenting is learning a loving limit. So at around 3:34, often my boy, I'm starving, right? And of course, as a mother, especially in Italian, I would, feed him, and then we'd sit down an hour and a half later at the dinner table and be like, "I'm not hungry." Okay, again, and then bedtime, "I'm hungry." And I suddenly realized actually at 3:30 I can say to him, "Yes, you might be hungry, you need to wait for dinner. You can have a glass of water or something. And, you know, it's not that smooth. He wasn't always like, oh, okay, mum, off I go. But really great time to also connect, because a lot of the time when he said he was hungry, he actually just wanted to play with me. We could sit on the floor and play stuff, or, you know, inviting children, as you said, get them involved in preparing food, get them involved in shopping, you know, just part of the whole ritual of how you as a family deal with and prepare food is wonderful. So other things I want to say is, if food is too triggering for you, this is where play at other times of the day are great. It's not like just because you've got an issue at dinner time, you have to play at dinner time. The magic of this is helping your children when you're feeling resourced and energetic, wonderful. And then that, the safety and security and the ability to release their feelings at those moments, that will spill over into dinner time. And again, same goes with every time that you feel, you know, bedtime might be your worst moment. You might be just too tired then. So yeah, but yeah, tricking children, hiding food, don't recommend that at all. I love that. I love knowing that children essentially know exactly what they need, but they only know that when you've helped them release any stress. Otherwise, they might actually do something. Again, an aware parenting thing is when they're not feeling centered or content in themselves. If something's irritating them, they might reach for things to put into their mouths. That's maybe where they might, you know, beg for sugar or steal sugar at the cafe and pour it down their mouth. So really, the bigger picture here around food is, once you've helped your children connect with themselves through connecting to yourself and connecting with each other, they're much more connected to knowing what their body needs. So I don't want to put anyone down, but we had an example years ago of this unschooling family visited our little homeschooling community, and this 4-year-old was allowed to eat as many ice creams and ice lollies as they were allowed, right? And, you know, we're sort of sitting there. I understand the premise of that, but this child was just so obviously crying out to connect with the parent, and for some various reasons the parent just wasn't connecting with the child, and so the child would constantly just demand. And I remember sitting there, demand food. So we're sitting there, I think this 4-year-old had, you know, like 4 or 5, any ice cream, you know, blue, bubblegum, whatever. And you can see the child sort of starting to feel more and more sick as the child, you know, ate all this stuff and, you know, changed to a sort of a sickly pallor. And I remember just being so fascinated by it, because I thought, wow, the child really doesn't need 15 ice creams. The child just needs deep connection and possibly needs to have a giant holler. And, you know, it wasn't my place to say or anything. So again, I really love that this modality is a beautiful middle path. It's not extreme permissiveness and it's not extreme authoritarianism, but it's nurturing the needs in a, you know, a much more rounded way. So yeah, that's
beautiful. Any bedtime play?
Yeah, bedtime, wonderful games at bedtime. One of our favorites when the children were young is pretending that the bed is a boat and they're on it. I still have a queen size bed. They would be on it and I was a dolphin or a shark, whatever you want to be. You know, again, we don't want to scare the children. And I would sort of try and catch them. And, you know, I could easily have reached across and caught them, but I would always pretend not to. So it's chasey, but they're not allowed to leave the boat and I'm not allowed out of the water. Simple game, played it for years. Kids loved it. There's another game, and I wish I knew who introduced this game to me. It's such a simple game. You sit opposite your child on a bed is good, or at least somewhere that's cushioned, and you put socks on and you have to try and get each other's socks off. It's such a simple game, Tracy, but it leads to just deep connection. It's super fun. Again, if your child's very little, you know, hold back, let them take the socks off, and when they do take them off, just go, oh my goodness, you got my socks. And this game developed into, we put 4 pairs of socks on, and they weren't allowed to take them all off at once. And kids are really good at making up their own rules as they go along, and you find that simple games then eventually get quite elaborate, and then that becomes part of your family culture. I would say that, if from an untrained eye would say he hates brushing his teeth, actually what he wanted was, he was a genius at wanting connection at teeth brushing time. And teeth were my issue, one of my many, because as a child I had a shocking horror. I was so scared of dental work and had my teeth filled and drilled, and how it went in the 80s. So my mission was always to be very serious about teeth, and I really wanted them to never have any issue with their teeth. So again, that was quite a big one for me. So Omri, my child at 4, would, time to brush your teeth. My daughter would quite happily brush her teeth. He, of course, would, as we say, kick up. And I'd be like, oh, it's nighttime, you have to brush your teeth. I can't force the toothbrush into your mouth. What do we do? Enter play, fabulous games. So it can be as simple as you pretend that you have no idea what to do with your toothbrush, stick it in your ear, or you can stick it up your bum. Bum humor is always quite fun, especially in our family. And then you get the child to show you how to do it. You go, hang on, what? That doesn't make any sense. That's not what you do. And just act as silly and as stupid as you possibly can. And then you find, before you know it, they're brushing their teeth and possibly brushing yours as well. Another game is you pretend that it's actually a paintbrush and that they're painting rainbows onto their teeth. Yes, I did say don't trick them, but this is for the parent to discern what, the fine line between tricking or teasing them. And we don't want to ever make them feel like they're not at least as much in command as they can be, age specifically. So the other game was the mechanic game, where I would, hoist him up and then brush his teeth. And there were even, I don't encourage, you don't need to buy lots of toys and props, but I remember my mum sending me this toothbrush that actually flashed lights and sung a really annoying song for 3 minutes. And I remember it coming in the post and going, oh my gosh, what is this? But it was great. It actually, I didn't have time to play every night, and he would, do it. So sometimes, maybe I can talk about plays and props later on, but sometimes it is actually great to use external things if they're at hand. But we are always our child's best toy, and I want people to remember that. We are their world. We are everything. I know as they grow up, things change, but it's really wonderful to keep that attachment as much as you can, and just remember that you are what your child delights in most of the time.
What about sibling rivalry, or the introduction of a sibling?
Yeah.
Tell me
so again, goodness me, again, another huge one for me. I was the middle of 3 daughters, very close in age, felt like I had very much middle child syndrome, felt like there was never enough love. So this was really huge for me, in an area that I'm really interested in. So again, if we start right at the basics, connecting with each child. This is sibling rivalry first, because the introduction of a new baby is slightly different. So from an attachment play point of view, not always easy, especially if you're under-resourced and don't have support, and as a sole parent, but making sure that you have individual time with your child separately and also together. So cooperative games are fabulous, but sibling rivalry, if you have to intervene, really great ideas are actually putting your body in between, and you can act silly, or you can start dancing, or do something random when they're about to squabble or actually hurting each other if you're a bit too late to help them. And oftentimes if you intervene and actually put your physical presence in, you can, in a light and light way, not as in about to tell them off or make them feel shame for behaving as they have done, because this is they're only acting in the they're acting out because of hurts that haven't been able to be supported. So I would often get in the way, and or you can pretend you're a robot and you try to stop them, and then that turns into a game, and they're trying to sort of get at each other through your hand, and can diffuse it really easily. But the key really is to connect with your children enough so that in itself prevents too much sibling rivalry. I don't think there's ever a family. Oh, I do know one family that reckons the children never ever argue with each other, but most 99% of families that I work with have issues with siblings, and it doesn't really I mean, I know the age difference is different. It makes a difference. So I know people that have teenagers and then 14 years later have a baby, different, but it's also still really important to nurture the needs of the teenager and not expect them to also have to always get on with their younger sibling, even though there's a large age difference. But connection is just always key there. If they are hurting each other, the sort of SOS is to, if you can't physically get in there, at least grab the offending arm or the toy, and that's where you won't go to play straight away in all circumstances, but we just, I'm not willing for you to hurt, and no, you don't want to hurt your sister. Sometimes it can be too wordy if the children are young, but just getting down at their level and connecting and being present is often enough to diffuse any potential damage. But again, doesn't always work. So if your children have hurt each other and it's all gone too far, it's a really lovely idea to use play afterwards to repair the damage. And things like, you can randomly, again, don't surprise the children or startle them, don't add to any more shock, but if they say my children had a fight and one of them had ended up hitting them with a ruler, you can then pretend to be that child later on and try to see if you can get them laughing about it. Or you can pretend that and again, it depends on your children, and it depends on your how you play in your house. But I remember sort of one time, and this doesn't always work, but my daughter had hit my son or kicked him, and I remember going, hang on, no, I want to hit him, how come you get to hit him? And I sort of pretended to be the third sibling, and then it turned into this big funny game, and no hitting happened, only laughter happened. So it's that's a tricky one for a lot of families, because it suddenly involves physical violence. Often it leads to physical violence, or words that can, you go, oh God, I can't believe you called your brother that, but the idea is to help them later on lighten the load. Larry Cohen has a great book called Playful Parenting, and he's got this fabulous game. So if your child starts swearing, and if they start swearing at a sibling, you can, again, age dependent, but get in there and go, hang on, you can't call him a poo head. He's actually a bottom head. And, he says it's his secret swear game. And it's been a while since I've read the book, but if you can sort of elaborate and get really silly with the words that the siblings are calling each other, it can often diffuse and lighten the load. And then, hopefully you get giggles, or if you get crying, that's also fine, because there's obviously some stress that needs to come out that hasn't come out earlier, so it's coming out sideways on their younger brother.
Thank you so much, Chiara. This is really landing. I think there's just so much great ideas to bring laughter and play and fun into a family. One of the things that I'm really acutely aware of as well for modern families is the over-reliance on screens and the influence that plays has on play, children's capacity to play, and of course connection, which has been so fundamental to your talk. Is there anything you want to say about screens?
Yeah, so much. So I always think I was lucky enough to have children born at a time where iPads weren't really in every household yet. They were just starting to come out at those tender years. And the screen time thing is absolutely huge. It's that whole, there's the debate of, I know some parents who still won't let their children have any technology, and then that often leads to children wanting it more, a bit like, you know, sugar and chocolate. If it's the forbidden fruit, then often, not always, they often want that thing more. So it's that fine, you know, it's that dance between wanting them to have sort of, I call it homeopathic doses of each of these things, but also checking in and seeing the quality of their being as they're using screens or as they're eating chocolate as well. So if they're sort of, you know, if their body's all tense and they're using that device as a, what we would call a control pattern to try and sort of stuff the feelings down, yes, absolutely, you can use screens as a pause button. Sometimes it's, you know, we can't all be there all the time acting like, you know, perfect Mary Poppins. But again, the key is allowing your children enough connection time with you, meaningful connection time with you and with loved ones, so that the need to, you know, distract themselves is lessened. But saying that, you can also play a lot of games around screen. So we had one when the kids did get an iPad. They had an iPad that they shared when they were young, and it was the whole thing of, okay, 5 more minutes, kids, time to turn off. So I definitely, you know, to this day, I'm quite, you know, I still impose limits on screen time. We make sure that we're outdoors a lot. As homeschooling families, it's quite easy to slip into that sort of, oh, look, it's raining, kids, just, you know, do what you want. Luckily, my son is not that into screens, but my daughter loves them and would possibly sit on them all day long. But it's, you know, as growing up, I made sure that we had a lot of outdoor movement and a lot of connection so that we could balance the, you know, the screen time. But putting a loving limit on was really important in my family, because I saw what it did to other families whose children were allowed to have free reign at a very young age. So we had an example of a really dear friend who, when they were about 10, got a computer, and I actually witnessed this child forget how to play. So he would come to our house, and at 10, well, I mean, we have toys, we have all sorts of sporting equipment. We live across the road from this incredible nature park and the footy field, and there's so much you can do in our area. And this 10-year-old would come around and say, I'm bored. And I remember just thinking, oh my goodness, wow, like this child has actually forgotten how to play. So to me, again, this is something I could talk about for hours. But I did have this game when the kids were little, and if they weren't turning off, I would draw with eyeliner or something, you know, non-toxic, on my tummy or on my hand, and say, look, you know, and I'd get in between the screen and them and say, oh, look, can you play with me now? And then try and encourage, a bit like with the sibling rivalry, you know, you sort of insert yourself. I know it sounds a bit dominating, but, you know, if you do it in a playful manner, you insert yourself. So you're inviting your children to connect with you rather than the screen. And again, once a loving limit around screen use is set, if any accumulated stress needs to come out, then from the aware parenting point of view, it will come out as crying or shaking or tantruming. But really wonderful if you can also, most of the time, help them to laugh. You know, laughter and crying both have sort of similar but different capacities and abilities to discharge stress from children's bodies. But again, the premise is, if your child is feeling connected and has had enough time during non-screen use time to, you know, regulate, again, a word we don't really love to use, but for, you know, for all intents and purposes for this talk, you know, if they've had time to kind of recenter and recalibrate, you'll find that they have much less need to be on screens and turn themselves off. As I notice in myself, when I'm feeling a bit, I notice I pick up the phone and go on Instagram much more than those days when I'm feeling a little bit more connected, you know. So it's the same for children. And really, you know, it's such a wonderful way to not introduce or add shame or stress around anything that is already quite stressful in modern life. We recently had an interesting chat with women from, well, parents, mothers, especially all around the globe, about teenagers and phone use. And it was more from the angle that, yes, they can often disconnect. That's why they're reaching for their phone all the time. But also it's the content of what is available to them from a young age, what they have access to. And it's, you know, it's dark, it's sinister. So this is where play and connection are so wonderful, because it means that if they do encounter anything that makes them feel a bit on their phones or on screens, they're more likely to come to you if you have been their ally rather than their, authoritarian disciplinarian. And if they trust you because you've worked on connecting in a lighter way, then it just means that, when they really need you, you're there for them. And to me, that play and lightness is very underrated. It's hugely underrated, actually, I would say. So I'd really like to inspire parents to start at any age and see, where play leads them.
Thanks, Chiara. I'm glad you just put in a bit about that, because I think it's a real challenge, and parents, we talk a lot about it in our sessions, and not to make anybody wrong, but to work out ways to manage and create loving limits around it, but recognise it is part of our lives now. Here are some of the resources that you've got there for us, and we'll certainly put some more resources with the actual the recording of this. But I just want to say a big thank you so much for sharing.
It's been great.
I wish I was your child.
Oh,
there's a lot of fun in your house.
I don't get it right all the time. I also have been that, I've come in too heavy-handed sometimes, and my play has been just exactly what they didn't need. Again, it's not about perfection, but it's excuse me. I also just wanted to, finish by saying, although the theory of the 9 attachment types is great, it's also wonderful to look at play, as you have done at the end of this, as in, looking at specific screen time, gunplay, weapon play, genital play, self-genital play, all those things that parents struggle with and go, oh, what's the answer? So you're looking at your life in sort of, categories other than types of play can also be very useful. So I'm always really honoured that parents reach out to me with specific issues, because together we can nut out, rather than nut out why, because, God knows why children do anything half the time, but helping them to actually connect through play and tailor making specific games for each children, depending on whether their thing at the moment is screen time or, whatever the child is going through. So it's, there are just many ways to look at it. And I just hope I've inspired parents enough to even dip their toe in the water of play. Because I can't, having 2 teenagers who we have a really connected relationship. Our house is mostly calm. They're very open. They come to me when they need me. And I feel like we've got a really wonderful relationship because of aware parenting, but especially because of our capacity to play and laugh and really enjoy each other's company.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So if people want some extra help and support, they can email you?
Yeah, email is the best way to do. Yeah, I work by word of mouth, or, people find me on discussions that I've had on various aware parenting pages, or I have been on Marion Rose has a excuse me, Marion Rose has a fantastic, I think you might have 2 actually, ongoing courses about playful parenting. So I often appear as a guest. So people just find me, and the right people find me, which is where I really like to be.
Well, we'll certainly let people know how they can contact you if they want to reach out. So
wonderful, great, and happy to answer any questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chiara. That's just been fantastic. And so I hope that's inspired you all to really think about how you can bring play, laughter, fun, connection into your family life. And there'll be some resources and things in the show notes for this recording. So have a great day. We'll see you again. Bye.
Thank you, Tracy.